Alexandra, thank you so much for being here. First of all, I need to ask the question, what is a creative wellness coach? How does creative and wellness combine and fit together?
Okay, the easiest way I like to think of it is if you picture a stool with three legs, and if they're holding up what a creative wellness coach is. So it's a mix of blending sort of art therapy inspired exercises, mindset and mindfulness coaching, and a splash of neuroscience to keep it all together. So that's how I think about it. And the idea is that I'm using simple creative exercises to help women in STEM, so science, technology, engineering, math, get to relax, de stress, and feel more like themselves through these creative exercises.
For how long are you doing that now?
Well, I've been an artist my whole life, so that's the easy part. I've been a scientist most of my adult schooling and professional life. And I came to coaching, I'd say in the last year or so. I've always been interested in art therapy, but I discovered coaching not too long ago and found it the difference. The way I like to think about the difference between therapy and coaching is if you think of a lifeguard. I trained as a lifeguard, so swimmer. Um, a therapist is helping somebody who is drowning in the pool. So they are dealing with past traumas and they can't see a way to get out of the pool. They're stuck in their troubles. Whereas a coach is working with somebody who knows how to swim, but they want to improve. They want to get better. They want to get faster. They want to develop a better technique. So I like working, and the idea is therapy is quite usually backwards looking. You're always looking backwards, whereas coaching, you're rooted in the present and you're working towards goals in the future. So that's why I like the idea of being proactive. Working towards wellness, working as a coach, helping my clients uh, basically get towards their goals faster. And those goals can be anything from just getting a better night's sleep to, going to work feeling not so overwhelmed to not, fighting with their families because they're on their last, you know, stressful nerve. So that's why I like to think of myself. I use a lot of art therapy inspired exercises, but they're a little bit reflective looking, but much more working towards the future.
And you're mainly doing that with women, right? That's the whole
Predominantly
point of it.
women right now. I find, I'm obviously a bit biased being a woman, but I find for women working in STEM, because it's quite often a predominantly male field, a lot of women have to mask their other attributes, whether that's intuition, whether that's emotion, um, y- in order to look like a quote professional, very detail oriented, very logical. So they may not represent themselves as a whole person in their profession to be deemed professional, which is yeah, it it eats at you after a while. And, I've worked in a number of STEM environments. I was an academic, I worked with the federal government, I worked for not-for-profits, I worked in corporate, and now I'm working as an entrepreneur. And there's different challenges. And I would say, you know, these days the playing field isn't level yet. Like women are still carrying a lot of the caregiving at home, whether it's young children or elderly parents. They nickname my generation the sandwich generation. We can still have kids at home, but dealing with parents, right? And so we've got responsibilities on both sides. So yes, I do typically work with women mostly, though not to say I wouldn't be open to working with coaching with men, but definitely my niche, so to say, is women in STEM right now.
Uh, how did that? Why is that we are making the majority of people in niches like STEM doing this difference between a male professional and a female professional? Where is that coming from? Is it just history and everything linked to that, or is there something that men are also maybe fearing a bit for their jobs in a very, very harsh put in the sentence, but that they are afraid that women could get their jobs? What is the main reason behind it?
I would definitely say it's a lot of cultural upbringing. Certainly in the West, that's definitely the case. Like if you think of, elementary school boys and girls both equally like math and like science, and then as they go through the higher grades, quite often, especially let's take engineering for example. It's a very easy one because right now there's quite a few societies in engineering who are pushing for 30 by 30 is what it's called, which means 30% women by the year 2030. That's an aspirational goal. We are not at 30% women in engineering.
Yeah.
We've been trying for a number, like it was a goal when I went to school. I had two very good girlfriends in electrical engineering. And by the time they graduated, they both moved out of being, they got their iron ring and they moved out of engineering because they just found it such a toxic environment to work in, which is unfortunate. They were, equal to their male peers, but by the time they got to the workplace, they both, voted with their feet and found something else because it wasn't a welcoming environment. And where does that come from? I don't know. It's certainly, if you take academia, let's say each degree you start with, let's take biology. That's what I did. I would say when I was in undergrad, it was, I would say maybe 80-20 women to men. By the time I got to master's, it was about maybe 50-50. By the time I got to my PhD, it flipped. And suddenly now it was 60-40, 70-30 maybe. And then by the time you start looking for careers, suddenly there were very, you know, a man and a woman could go into an interview, and they did a study on this where they actually blacked out the names and just put the initials. And when that was done, the women got as many interviews as men if they left the full names on.
Wow.
So, yeah, they did another study recently with looking at university salaries. Same positions, women were typically making 80 cents to a man's dollar. And that was for the same role, same tenure. Yeah, it's definitely a loaded playing field right now. And yeah, it causes a lot of stress. So hence, this is again why I became a creative wellness coach. Because a lot of these women, they also may have been creative in their earlier lives too, and they had to quash that in order to blend in to do their jobs. So it's a way to let them play and explore and get in touch with some of those things that they may have been, pushing down or put in a box,
Yeah.
and come back to it that way.
I can't say that I've ever really, really long thought about the topic because, of course, I'm not someone that is impacted by that. And in Germany, I would say the whole topic is not that big of a deal in the mainstream media at the moment, as it should probably be. There are certain cases coming up in the last few weeks that I remember where female counterparts experienced or found out that their male counterparts in the same job, in the same industry, get more money than them just because they did more salary challenges and more
Negotiation.
salary
Yes.
negotiations. Thank you. And so there are those one-time cases that are coming up and we hear about here in Germany, and of course it is a problem as well here, but I never really thought about it that much. That also needs to lead to burnout, right? Is that a
Definitely.
topic that also
That
comes with it?
Yeah, that's exactly what a lot of this basically, if you live with a high level of stress, and not to say that stress itself is bad, it's when you don't let go of the stress. Like it's, our bodies are used to doing that fight or flight response.
Hmm.
What our bodies are not used to doing is staying in flight or flight response, all the time. And so we build up very high levels of cortisol, which is a stress hormone, and that can basically affect your physical health in many ways. It can lead to poor sleep at night. It can lead to what they call the Sunday night dread, where you can't sleep the night before you start work on the Monday. That's like a known phenomenon, the Sunday dreads. It can also lead to, even when you're at work, feeling apathetic or numb, like the feeling that you're just sort of on autopilot and you're going through the motions. There's a lot of ways that burnout can show up, just even in your own body, emotionally and physically as well. But just to add to that point, if there's been recently on LinkedIn, there's been a bit of a controversy where women were switching their profiles to male and finding their engagement stats taking off. And some of the men turned their profiles to female and found their engagement tanked. And that's based on an algorithm that's been trained on data. Um, and so again, algorithms are only as good as we train them, as you know. And so if the data that you feed these algorithms with is biased, you're going to get some skewed results down the road as well, too.
Yeah, definitely. Wow. Okay, so is that only a phenomenon that we see in predominantly man jobs like engineering, IT, all of the technical things that women didn't start to get into that early?
Well, there's a terrific book called The Invisible Data. And again, it's about how a lot of times, again, coming back to using men as the default for a lot of settings. So crash test dummies were a recent one. In fact, they've only recently made a female crash test dummy. So seatbelts weren't fitting properly, airbags weren't positioned properly because they deemed using, quote, an average male would suffice for both, halves of the population. There was a case with the astronaut suits for NASA, again, not being small enough to fit the women because the average size was meant for a middle to large male.
Hmm.
Uh, so it's again, you have to take it into the design. When I was working in medical devices, um, we were working on a brand new way of doing mammograms instead of, the what they call the waffle iron approach, which is about as uncomfortable as it sounds. But again, they needed to look for women volunteers to test the equipment, and a lot of time women are you know nervous to volunteer because they have to suddenly juggle, I have to step away from my family or I have to step away from my job. So they were having a hard time recruiting volunteers because it just seemed to be one more thing to add to your responsibilities and not getting the recognition for doing it. So there's a few dominoes that need to fall in order for it to work.
Yeah, and for that whole problem to be just resolved, I think it will take a lot of time, even when the whole world starts to tackle this problem tomorrow. There will be many, many spaces that we are not really thinking about at the moment that also need to be thought about. So, how can a woman in her everyday life cope with it? Because she alone can't do something immediately to do the situation better or do it better for everybody. So, what can every woman or everybody who just not feels right where they're working do to increase or have a better life at their job?
Well, definitely with the women I work with, the first step is giving yourself permission, I say, to say no. And that could be, there's often pressure to people please. So, of course, you're going to agree to volunteer to do the next committee. Of course, you're going to volunteer to bake 20 cupcakes to bring to your kid's birthday party. I- And what I try to work with my clients is it's okay to say no. It's okay to pause, right? Take a moment and say, look, let me get back to you on that. And if you start, there's a great book called Essentialism, where again, it's all about the art of saying no and taking that pause, taking the pause to think, is this something I really want to do? Or is this something I'm feeling obligated to say yes to? Um, you can almost think of like the Marie Kondo. Is this something that's going to spark joy for me? Is this something I want to do, or is this something I feel I should do or I have to do? Do I feel like I'm going to let somebody down if I say no? Do I feel okay if I say no and I feel like I'm going to let them down? Those are the first steps of deciding in, making intentional decisions. I think that's how you can start thinking about it. And it goes to even looking at your calendar at work, you know, blocking off time for yourself to do deeper work, right? Maybe block the email, block your phone. And, that's definitely something I also talk about boundaries, whether it's setting boundaries between you and the people you report to or have report to you and, deciding what a good, healthy boundary looks like. Maybe that's with family members. Maybe you have a family member that you know, shows up unannounced to events where you wish that you got a bit of a heads up, setting expectations and boundaries, whether that's at home or at work. And then, yeah, literally putting boundaries in your calendar to protect your time. So you still have time to focus on things that you want to focus on, let alone accomplishing things for others.
How can you make your life better with a 5-minute drawing?
I knew you were going to ask me that.
Yeah, I was just waiting to shoot that one out.
Yeah, it sounds simplistic, but the idea, and this is something I stumbled on, which sort of led me down the art therapy and coaching route, is during COVID, I worked from home like everybody else. And I was working 24/7, working, my kids were at home, so I had to help school them. I was 24/7 on my job because my company had just landed a big government contract to make emergency ventilators. So we were working 24/7 to get these ventilators developed and out in the hands of Canadians because that was before the vaccines were ready. Um, and I just got so utterly blocked. I couldn't make art, which used to be my outlet. I couldn't stop thinking about work. And it was on, I think, one of those endless Zoom calls where I just started drawing simple patterns in the margin of my notes, right? Like I was just, and I started feeling a lot better. Like it sounds simple, but it's just that sort of repetitive hand on paper. It got me out of, that self-reflective hamster wheel churning type thing. And I started doing a lot more reading about art therapy and mindfulness. And there's a lot of neuroscience that supports that sort of simple, repetitive hand motions, whether it's, drawing in time to your breath. It actually starts slowing your breath. It puts you more in that rest and digest instead of that fight or flight, because you start paying attention to your hand moving across the paper. And the goal is not to make, a finished artwork. It's more about the process. And as you relax into the process, it actually starts getting your brain moving in more creative ways. Yeah, it's like you kind of open the floodgates a little bit. And that's just, a simple way. You could draw to music. That's another way of getting out of your body and just getting your hand moving. It's a bit different than journaling. Like journaling is terrific for self-reflection, but often there's a lot of subconscious things that come out while drawing because it's a different mode than writing and having to formulate words into sentences. So you can do a lot of shortcuts visually. There you could draw symbols that suddenly represent something. A lot of my clients, when I ask them to draw their ideal day, draw suns, right? Because to that to them, it means, a happy moment, contentment. And that's what a sun represents for them. It's if you ask them to describe chaos, they'll draw like, you know, a hurricane, swirls. It's quite universal, the symbols, and that's what I also find interesting about it. We have a lot of shared, I guess, what you call iconography, so symbols that represent things for us. So there's a lot of universal symbols as well that come up when I work with my clients in drawing. So, simple answer, 5 minutes of drawing helps reset your brain.
Very, very simple. No matter what you're drawing. Thank you so, so much for your time. Where can people go if they want to draw with you or get to know you a bit better?
Yeah, easiest thing is to go to my website. It's Mind Art Wellness. And on there, you can find a free 5-day little challenge where you get an email and a video each day with a different sort of art therapy inspired exercise with some journaling questions if you wish to journal. And there's a newsletter you can sign up for, which I send out weekly, which is also free. So there's lots of mindfulness, creativity, wellness tips in that as well.
Thank you so, so much for all the work you're doing.
That's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.